First of all, please excuse my hair, my uniform, and the fact that I upload this video late. I'm not going to be making excuse because you guys are already looking at that excuse. You see that? That was the reason why I couldn't set my feet into my house in the last 48 hours. Well, almost 48 hours. And you must be thinking, well, at least you brought your computer with you, right? No, not at all. My mom, she totally forgot to bring my computer. So I had to use her iPhone, which is kind of like weird because I have to like research all the informations. And now, before I officially start the video, I just want to state one thing. I do not learn by heart, and I will absolutely not learn 5 pages of Wikipedia page about the history of Canada. But what I'll do is I will select the most important events and list it in my computer. But I will not learn it by heart either because that's not my style. A part, I'm lazy. The second part, you do not learn things by heart. Like if you don't learn them by heart, like that's not how you learn things. That is a bad way of learning things. I know that's how you learn to prepare for your test, but that's not how I prepare for my test. So let's just get into it. So if I kind of like leave any kind of events behind, I'm sorry, because let's just say that I will like 2 hours of reading pages of Wikipedia, my eyes may get a bit tired, and maybe I forgot to add some. So let's get into it. So the history of Canada started first about 17,000 or 50,000 years ago. And the first people who were living on the land of Canada were the indigenous people, also called the native people. And they had been living there thousands of years before the Europeans even arrived. And not only the indigenous people were there were also the Inuit and the Métis. And those 3 groups, I don't know if how to say Métis or is it Métis? I'm sorry. These 3 groups mixed together and they have several names. For example, the First Nation, the Aboriginal, the just indigenous. And now they were used to be called the Indians, but some people say that name was like kind of like offensive, so pass. I don't know why though. I don't have much information on that, so sorry. And the Vikings were the first to set the foot on Canada. It was pretty like obvious because Canada had a lot of influence from Europe, especially France. That's because you guys had a prime minister. Not judging anything though. And when they first landed on Canada, well, of course, at that time it wasn't named Canada. They call it the Newfoundland, not Newfoundland. Newfoundland, just straight up like that. What a creative name. And of course, they were led by the famous Vikings explorer Leif Erikson. But they did not like stay for long, because in the mid 16th centuries they started to explore the east coast of Canada. Well, you know, the Europeans, they're from many countries. The first to explore was an Englishman called John Cabot in the 1467, and then a Jacques Cartier, who's from France, in 34, dang it. And Alexander Mackenzie in 1497. Alexander Mackenzie later reached the Pacific coast over land, where Captain James Cook and George Vancouver went by sea. The Europeans was also kind of like trading beaver furs with the First Nations, the Aboriginals. Of course, we cannot mention Canada without beaver. But there was some kind of conflicts happening between the two nations of France and the Great Britain, because some of the parts were like settled by the French, but some of them were settled by the Great Britain. So of course, conflict things will happen. And this is how the French started their move. In 1605, the Port Royal was built in the Acadia, which is now known as the Nova Scotia, and it was led by the Captain Samuel de Champlain as he started to settle the Quebec. But sadly, the British took over almost every single area of the French after the 7-Year War, also known as the French and the Indian Wars, called by the Americans. So after the American Revolutionary War, some of them were like, many people like new from the United States, they were really loyal to the Britain, which I suggest you should. Well, I'm not politically correct, so. And thousands came north to Canada and settled in the Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, the Quebec, and Ontario. They were called the United Empire Loyalists. During the War of 1812, the United States tried to conquer the Canada, but of course they were defeated. We have to defend our nation, always. So on July the 1st of 1867, Canada was united under a federal government. It included the province of Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. Sir John A. Macdonald was the first Prime Minister ever of Canada, and I kind of noticed that I typed John A. Macdonald the wrong way. I'm sorry. And Manitoba, the Yukon Territory, and the Northwest Territories became the part of Canada in the 1870s. The British Columbia joined in the 1871, and the Prince Edward Island joined in 2 years later. There were 2 Red Rivers rebellions, one from 1869 to 1870 and one in the 1885. Sorry with the numbers. Both led by Louis Riel. I don't know if you say that by Louis or Louis. He fought for more rights for the Métis people and a mix between French and First Nations, just a mix. The Métis, yes. A railroad across the country, the Canadian Pacific Railway, finished in the 1885, made it easier for the Canadians to move to the west, which was funny because at that time in Vietnam, it was kind of like bad. Oh, don't want to remember. Having a lot of Vietnamese war flashback, as many people said. Many Europeans came to the prairies, so Alberta and Saskatchewan, also Alberta and Saskatchewan became the province of Canada in the 1905. Canadian soldiers fought in the World War I for the British Empires. More Canadians died in this war than any other war because, let's be honest, Canadians are like it's a pretty peaceful country and we say no to wars. And Canada became like a better-known country after its success in capturing Vimy Ridge from the Germans in French in the 1917. The women were given the right to vote by the end of the war at that time, partly because of the help that they gave, like making the weapons for the men to forge in Europe. Good thing, ladies, good things. And in 1931, the Canada became fully independent. Yay. And it took Vietnam like 14 years later. It's a good thing. And then the government made all kinds of decisions about Canada. A crew of a Sherman tank resting while parked. Wow, why did I even say that? Oh yes, that part was like supposed to be deleted. I'm sorry. I mean, Canadian also fought at the World War II. Canadian also fought at the World War II, and the Rapid Raid in like the 1942, it went really badly, and most of the soldiers were killed, wounded, or taken as prisoners, sadly. And Canadians were like important in 1944 in Germany, and not Germany, Normandy, and they liberated the Netherlands from the German. Yeah. In 1949, Newfoundland and Labrador became the 10th province of Canada. Yes, they still call it Newfoundland until the 1949. In 1956, the Canadian Lester Person, who later became the Prime Minister, helped end the Suez Crisis. As a result, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Next, in 1965, Person helped Canada to get a new flag, the maple leaf. Of course, we also cannot mention Canada without maple leaf or maple syrup. And before that, you know what they signed? You know what they used? Red ensign. I couldn't get an image of what it looks like, so. In 1982, Canada changes its constitution, including a new Canada Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The main part of the Constitution is still the 1867 British North America Act. Some French Canadians today, well, I don't know why, but they wish to have their own countries, which I say, no, don't. They want to be separated from the rest of the Canada. The province of Quebec held like a referendum, or so-called like a vote reference or something. In 1980, sorry, I'm like confused with the numbers today. In the 1980, but only about 40% wanted to separate it from the Canada, so debunk, sorry bro. Since then, fewer people in Quebec have wanted to leave Canada, but it's still important to Quebec politics. Today, about 25% of Canadians speak French as their first language. Many people can speak both French and English, which I think is super dope. Although most French Canadians live in the province of Quebec, there are French-speaking community in many provinces all over Canada. For example, 40% of people in New Brunswick are French Canadians, and 20% of those in Manitoba have a strong French background, and also some people in Ontario, they are French Canadians. In 1999, Nunavut was created as Canada's third territory out of the Eastern Northwest Territory in an agreement with the Inuit people, which I'm surprised that they still kept that name. So officially, in 2014, after tax, the middle class incomes in Canada were reported to be higher than those in the United States. I don't know why I add that, but it seems kind of cool to me. So that was basically me reading all of the accomplishment I've had in the last few days. So that was the history of Canada. Of course, this video was boring. I was stuttering numbers all the time, but hey, at least I did not try to read 5 pages of Wikipedia in front of your face, or asking another person about the history of Canada instead of actually researching it. Telling you the truth. And of course, to make up for my mistake, today there will be a second and a third video.